But first, let's talk about the title race. The title race that seemed pretty boring this weekend. Both Bayern and Leverkusen raced out of the gate and pretty quickly seemed to dispatch their opponents. In Bayern's case, it almost led to an epic collapse at the very end. Leverkusen too, up 3-0 early. Then, sending off, Grimaldo got sent off, right? And for a while, it looked a bit more interesting. I think a little less traumatic than Bayern Munich's late collapse, but still, it was more interesting than I expected considering the opponents that each team faced on this match day. Considering how everything else unfolded on this match day, remains Bayern and Leverkusen are the two teams circling at the very top, fighting for this Bundesliga title. But what I thought was really interesting that both of them actually showed some weaknesses this match day. And we need to start with Bayern Munich. Joshua Kimmich after the match said, if we don't play to our upper limit, we're pretty ordinary. It came closer than I think a lot of people thought that Kiel would score a fourth there at the very end and probably lead to the most epic collapse in Bayern Munich history. 4-0 up to Kiel and then 4-4. I think would have caused a lot of panic. This way, they get all 3 points, panic averted, but it's still there. The fact is still there that Kiel all of a sudden was there to score 3 quick goals and make this match more interesting than many hoped.
Yeah, I mean, as a kind of classic, Bayern were already pulled on their slippers and we're kind of already looking forward to the next match day. The game is obviously finished after, you could probably say it was finished at half-time, to be perfectly honest with you, and then obviously 2 goals shortly after the half. Shortly after this beginning of the second half, rather, kind of concluded that too. Yeah. And then Kiel just kind of score goals out of nowhere. Pratt scores a great finish and then 2 somewhat fortunate goals in the sense that, rebounds and deflections and things like that. It was a really interesting match in that regard, because if you then kind of factor in the clearance off the line from Kim, in the first half, you could argue that perhaps in one way this game could have finished 4-4. And for Kiel to go on and obviously score 3 goals at Bayern and then potentially should have scored 4 was crazy. You could argue that I think the second and third goals were both from really acute angles, at least the first and the second one, I think. So, it was just one of those things where everything just seemed to work out for them. The last goal, I think, was a case of Konrad Laimer just completely forgetting to tuck inside and allowing Kiel to kind of just break through. But yeah, it's quite an interesting kind of conundrum for Bayern Munich because they have showed a capacity, to concede goals this season. There's no real two ways about it. They obviously, conceded against Freiburg. They conceded 2 against Wolfsburg, Hoffenheim and Gladbach. They obviously kept clean sheets against. But, if you kind of go through this whole kind of list, they've only managed to actually keep 2 clean sheets since, the end of November in the Bundesliga. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. In the last 9 games, they've conceded, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm doing this in real time, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 goals, which is never good enough for any Bayern Munich team, to be perfectly honest with you. If a team wants to be challenging for the title, you have to score goals. And we joked before the game started on Saturday, this game had, Harry Kane hat-trick written all over it because that's how he scores his goals. He scores his goals against the bottom half of the table. And sure enough, he did. 2 pretty straightforward goals. One of them, obviously, an outstanding header, just kind of tucked into the top corner as looping header. Classic striker football from him. But that defense is still a little bit all over the place. And it's really interesting because you then look at Bayer Leverkusen, who we mentioned, obviously they kind of let Hoffenheim back into that game as well. I had this game written down, from a betting point of view, I would say almost like both teams to score felt like it just felt like a certainty because for all of Leverkusen's kind of success this season, they've really kind of struggled to, keep clean sheets. I think over the course of so far this season in the Bundesliga, they've actually only kept 3 clean sheets over the course of the entire league campaign. And much like Bayern Munich, both teams are struggling to maybe not pick up wins, but they're definitely struggling to kind of properly dominate games, as you would expect from the two teams who are well and truly away with it in the Bundesliga. I was quickly checking before we came on air here. In the last 10 league games now, Leverkusen and Bayern Munich are both sitting on 25 points. The next team in third place is Stuttgart, which is 19. So they've picked up 6 more points. Sorry, I tell a lie. Leverkusen have 28, Bayern have 25, and Stuttgart have 19. So both of them are far and away. They're beginning to actually, if anything, pull away from the rest of the league, and we'll touch about that as well later in the show.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting in terms of the fact that neither of them can, keep clean sheets, because if you look at who they've got coming up next, Leverkusen go to Wolfsburg, and then of course Bayern Munich welcome a very good Bremen side who are very good on the road before they then of course play each other. So, it might see some more twists in this title race because neither of these two teams can keep clean sheets.
One in Leverkusen's case, they're just not able to. Last year when they were in a winning position, they dropped 0 points, and this year they dropped points in 6 games. 13 points overall. That is, I think, also a huge difference to last year, right, where they were so pretty much perfect. And 6 games, dropping points from 6 games is a lot. It is actually astonishing that despite that, they're still on 45 points this season. They're still on an incredible pace to finish out the Bundesliga campaign, probably with the second highest point total in history, right? They can't get to where they were last year. That's pretty much impossible. But, I think it's fascinating that even though they're not quite as perfect as they were last year, they're still very good. But if you want to look at the one flaw, it is because, they just dropped too many points from those winning positions. And it's also, I think, a little telling that that by Bayern Munich standards, right? I mean, this is a very good campaign as well. It's the most since the Pep Guardiola years, right? And yet they're still being chased, and they still have these flaws at times. I think it's also fascinating, and there was so much talk with the transfer window closing about these 2 youngsters that Bayern Munich signed for lots of money, Adan Asnu and Mathys Tel, and they both featured in the last few games, and Asnu in this game, could be pretty much made responsible for some of the defensive lapses that showed. And it's kind of this. It's fascinating how there is so much hype on these young players, and how so much of the Bayern Twitter bubble wants these players to play, but maybe they're just not ready to play for this team. And Vinny Kompany, without causing too much damage, actually showed it this weekend, right? Because he's like, look, he can now say, look, we tried, and it almost cost us 2 points against Holstein Kiel. These players are just not ready, or maybe not the caliber that Bayern Munich expect. And it's an interesting part of the equation, I think. Obviously, too, it also shows that in a time where Bayern Munich are now in the final stages of approving the Alphonso Davies deal, people will shouted that Adan Asnu should be the one that will replace him. It kind of really shows you that on that left back position, they're very thin, right? Even with Davies staying, that defensive line still has so many issues, and they're very thin. I mean, even someone like Guerrero is a significant downgrade. And yeah, I mean, those are weaknesses that can be explored. And you talk about the schedule, right? Leverkusen midweek against Köln in the German Cup. And then, of course, Bayern Munich have the 2 Celtic games in and around that Leverkusen match. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many moving parts still. I personally think Bayern Munich are in the driver's seat to win the title, and I would actually expect them to win the title. It's just, when you look at the matches, I feel like there's still some twists and turns in this title race, possibly, that could make this interesting or keep it interesting to the very end. And some of it is Bayern's defensive deficiencies and Leverkusen's ability to still drop points from winning positions. I mean, we only need to go back one match day against Leipzig, where they dropped 2 points from being 2-0 up against Leipzig, and that game seemed done and dusted. And even today, against a very poor Hoffenheim side, they made it too easy for Hoffenheim to come back into it.
Yeah, obviously Grimaldo getting sent off. and it wasn't so long ago they were talking about the lack of kind of discipline that Leverkusen were showing in that Atletico Madrid game in the Champions League as well. There is that kind of aspect to this team that if things don't go their way, they start getting quite fed up very quickly. You can see the blood boiling under the surface. Yeah, I mean, I think both clubs are probably struggling with the fact that they're not entirely happy with their defences. Obviously, at Leverkusen, I mean, you can obviously point to the Grimaldo sending off, which isn't ideal by any means.
Yeah.
But, I think Xabi Alonso has really struggled to kind of juggle a decent selection of central defenders, but none of them really standing out. Hincapi, Jonathan Tah, Tapsoba, all three of them have had their issues this season. None of them have been entirely fantastic. I think the club are really struggling with, and we've talked about this numerous times this season, the fact that Jonathan Tah and Hradecky put in like superhuman performances last season, and they've came back down to earth, and they're just back to being very normal players this year. That's not their fault. That's just the way the football works. But it's those little like 10% or 5% here and there that add up and can lead to the difference between a team conceding a goal late on against Hoffenheim and a team keeping a clean sheet. And then, of course, you look at Bayern Munich's situation. I think Kompany's done well, as we've said again, throughout the season to kind of get the best out of Kim and Upamecano. Although they do still have moments where they have hiccups, notably in the Champions League. But for the most part, both of them have formed a pretty decent, solid foundation. Kim obviously cleared a shot off the line this weekend is a good example of that. But the issues are at fullback. Alphonso Davies obviously had that left back role locked down as he has done for a number of years, and he was looking back to his best before the injury. I don't know if we've actually got like a clear idea yet of how long he's expected to be out for, Manu. I think it's a hamstring injury, which can be anything from like 2 weeks to 3 monds. And then even when he does return,
they give a window of 3 to 6 weeks, which is exactly what you said. It's one of those injuries that are hard to predict.
Yeah, between now and the end of the season.
Exactly.
And the problem with hamstring injuries is it's really easy to aggravate it again if you come back too quickly. But the alternative, as you said, is Guerrero, who's just obviously isn't up to the task of placing Davies by any means. Yes, he can play. Yes, he can run forward. He can dribble with the ball. He can pass. He can do neat 1-2s. He can set up goals. But he's not a defender. He never has really been a great defender, to be perfectly honest with you, at the Bundesliga level. And then you look at the other side where you've got guys like Konrad Laimer there, who equally very good going forward, very neat passes of the ball. But Laimer's just not a defender. And I think it was the Kiel's third goal, where it's just a straight through ball down the middle of the pitch. And you can see Upamecano and Kim furious that space to Upamecano's right has just been left wide open. And that's just defending 101. If you're playing at fullback, you're supposed to tuck in alongside your central defender. And now maybe in certain circumstances, and I can certainly see a scenario in which Kompany is playing very kind of elaborate games and methods where, he sends both fullbacks up the pitch at certain times. But to me, that felt like that's what happens when you have a midfielder filling in at fullback. And the problem for Bayern is that, Sacha Boey is extremely injury prone. So much so that I've been led to believe that he actually joined the club with serious injury concerns, which Bayern haven't been able to alleviate. So there's some serious question marks over his long-term viability as a Bayern player, to be honest with you, or the reliability of him as a Bayern player. So if you factor all that in, that means the only actual fullback that Bayern have in that position is Josip Stanisic, who was actually trained as a central defender, if I'm not mistaken, for most of his youth career. So Bayern desperately need a right back this summer. I think they need a right back. They need a solid left back, I would say, as well, probably, maybe. But in here now, those are the positions that dog Bayern. And in Leverkusen's situation, it's the central defenders and possibly a goalkeeper as well. Which are their problems. But, it just goes to show that even though these are the two best teams in Germany, they do have their faults. And I'll be really interested to see if Werder Bremen can do something against Bayern next weekend, and if Wolfsburg can do something against Leverkusen.
Yeah, no, I think you point out some really interesting things here. I mean, the Sacha Boey thing is so odd, considering they paid 30 million euros for him, right, to sign him from Galatasaray last winter. and I really don't know why. It's just it's just baffling me that you would spend this amount of money for a player, and again, that's a lot of money for Bayern Munich. They don't always go out and make these big splashes, and there's a lot of money for a wingback. I actually am partly convinced that one of the reasons why the board ultimately relented and approved the Alphonso Davies contract, even though it's significant, is because if you go out there and try to get the same player, it's actually significantly more. For a position that a few years ago wasn't really that vital and was considered a surplus, right? There was too many players out there that could play it, and now all of a sudden it's become this weak link.
Well, the Boyd deal was like a kind of January panic move, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So it's not really as if they did their homework and been chasing him for 12 months as a player that they knew was for sale. They signed him. Yeah, they probably overpaid for him. But he joined from Galatasaray with some serious injury concerns. And I mean, I'm on his page right now on Transfermarkt, and since he's joined Bayern, which was little over a year ago, he's already missed 14, 26, 20, 27 games. He's missed so far for Bayern, and he only joined the club 12 months ago. So, I don't suspect he's going to be a regular first team player anytime soon for Bayern Munich. So yeah, they're going to have to go back to the old chalkboard and make some new plans in the summer.
Again, for 30 million euros. I mean, they're in contract talks with Joshua Kimmich. I understand it's not always easy, but right now I think he might be your best right back. He plays that role for Germany, right? I know he doesn't have quite the pace that you need in that position necessarily, but we do also know that he plays that position extremely capable. Probably better than any other right back in that Bayern squad, to be honest with you. So you almost wonder if, with Goretzka being resurgent and Palhinha coming back, do you move Kimmich into that role? Is that your solution to stabilize that defense in the short term, at least?
Yeah, maybe. I was just kind of wondering whether they could have, if Kompany might get a bit experimental here and stick Stanisic in there and then almost play like a sort of back three, because obviously Kimmich does like to drift out wide and swing those crosses in from the right back spot anyway. So you could play like almost back three. It's technically a back four, but Stanisic just stays deep, and then that means that gives Guerrero the freedom to just bomb forward without really having to worry about moving back, because that defense just kind of shifts over a bit for him. So that's an option, I guess, for Bayern. But I think also we have to bear in mind that, like, without Davies, that attacking output just drops dramatically. I know it's a silly thing to say after they just won a game and scoring 4 goals, but
against Kiel.
Yeah, against Kiel, exactly. So Guerrero's fine against Kiel. Whether he's good enough against teams like a Werder Bremen team like I said, doing very well. The team obviously picked up an important 3 points this weekend. And then, of course, they have to travel to Leverkusen for a game, which still I would dub, a title decider.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. Both those teams, excellent at the very top. We continue to see them hopefully both stay into title contention until the very end. I want the title race to be as close as possible. It's the most exciting thing I personally think it's the best thing when the title gets decided on the final match day. So I hope that's how it ends. I think it'd be great drama. And I actually ultimately don't care who of the two wins it. I just want it to be on the final match day. I think that's the best when a Bundesliga campaign gets decided. Hopefully even with the last shot. Those have always been my greatest memories. I mean, I just seen videos this week of when Schalke thought they had won it for about 5 minutes back in the 90s, and then Andersen scored that free kick within the box, and like while the Schalke fans were already celebrating, the title went back to Munich after all. Those are the kind of things and stories that you remember for the rest of your life, and of course I think that would be the best outcome here. So hopefully that's how it ends.